They called me ungrateful. My parents stood in front of 100 guests at my brother's birthday party, screaming that I was a disgrace. The music stopped. All eyes turned on me, and before I could breathe, a champagne bottle shattered against my shoulder. Blood ran down my arm as people gasped and laughed. I stood frozen, humiliated, with cameras capturing every second. But here's the part no one in that room understood. I wasn't the failure they believed. I wasn't the invisible daughter they dismissed. And before this night ended, it wouldn't be me left broken. My family loved to pretend we were perfect. On Facebook, my parents posted pictures of smiling faces, golden balloons, expensive dinners, and endless praise for my younger brother, Daniel. He was always tagged as the pride of the Carters. Me? I was invisible. If I happened to appear in the background of a photo, my mother would crop me out before hitting post. If a story about our family was shared, it was never mine. It was as if my existence was a blemish that ruined their carefully polished image. When I was 10 years old, I won first place in a statewide writing contest. I remember gripping the certificate in both hands, my chest swelling with pride. I had worked on that story late into the night, scribbling under a flashlight when I was supposed to be asleep. For once, I felt I had done something worth celebrating. But when I ran home to show my parents, my father frowned. "This should have been Daniel's," he muttered, almost as if I had stolen something. The next day, when they framed the certificate on the living room wall, my name was gone. Daniel's name had been neatly typed over mine, as if I had never existed. Guests came and praised my brother's talent, and I stood silently in the corner, too stunned to cry. That was the first time I understood what it meant to be erased. I remember one night sitting alone in the corner of my dark room, my knees pulled tightly against my chest. The glow of the hallway light didn't reach me, and I whispered to myself, "If even my parents don't see me, who will?" The silence was heavy, the kind that eats away at you. I felt so small, so unnecessary, like a shadow lingering where no one wanted it. But that unanswered question would not stay unanswered forever. Somewhere out there, someone would see me in ways my family never could. I just didn't know it yet. Daniel's life was the opposite of mine. He had a bright, spacious bedroom with posters of his favorite sports teams, a shiny new bike, and eventually his own car at 16. He never had to work a single shift at a diner or a store. Meanwhile, I was stuck on the living room sofa, folding blankets every morning so my presence wouldn't clutter the house. At 16, I was already balancing school and multiple part-time jobs, while Daniel was chauffeured to basketball practice. When college applications came, I begged to apply. My grades were strong and I had a scholarship opportunity waiting, but my parents shut me down. "Daniel needs the tuition. You'll manage with a job," my mother said, as if it was obvious. I was forced to quit school and work full-time to cover expenses at home. I watched my dreams shrivel while my brother lived the life I had imagined for myself. And every time I tried to protest, my father's voice crushed me. "You were born to support others, Evelyn. Don't pretend you're more than that." I tried to prove them wrong. I studied at night, took on projects, and even entered small competitions, hoping they would notice. But every victory was dismissed. If I came home with a paycheck, they would say it wasn't enough. If I showed them something I'd written, they would laugh, claiming writing was child's play. Even when I saved enough money to buy my own clothes instead of wearing Daniel's hand-me-downs, my mother sneered, "What's the point? You'll never outshine him." Each dismissal was a cut deeper than the last, but I learned to stop showing them my wounds. I learned to swallow every word, every dream, every spark of pride. And deep inside, where no one could reach, I began to form a silent vow. One day, they would see. Not because I needed them to, but because I would no longer allow them to ignore me. I would carry their words, their erasures, their cruelty, and I would transform it into something they couldn't deny. They thought I was born to be a shadow, to make Daniel's light brighter. But a shadow can stretch, can shift, can engulf everything if it chooses. I said nothing aloud. I never confronted them. Outwardly, I remained the quiet daughter, the background figure, the sofa sleeper. But in the privacy of my own mind, I whispered that vow every night before I fell asleep. I will not be erased, and though no one in that house could hear it, the vow settled into my bones, becoming part of me. Someday it would surface, and when it did, it would shake the very foundation of everything they believed. The first years on my own were nothing glamorous. I rented a small, damp studio apartment with peeling wallpaper and a heater that barely worked in winter. The window faced an alley filled with trash cans, and every night I could hear rats scratching in the walls. I couldn't afford much furniture, so I sat on a secondhand mattress with my laptop, typing until my fingers ached. That was where my anonymous blog was born. I wrote about the loneliness, the humiliation of being erased, the constant feeling of being unwanted. I poured my heart out into those digital pages, never revealing who I was. To my surprise, people read. Strangers commented with compassion, telling me their own stories, their own scars. It was the first time I felt seen, even if it was by faceless names on a screen. The blog became my lifeline, a place where my voice mattered, even if only in secret. But the outside world wasn't as kind. I tried to start a small online shop selling handmade journals. I invested the little money I had, but the business failed miserably. I had no marketing skills, no connections. The night I announced I was shutting it down, my parents went live on Facebook. I remember sitting frozen in front of my cracked laptop, listening as my mother sneered into the camera. "See? That's why we never invested in her ideas. She's a failure, always has been." The comments rolled in with laughing emojis, their friends agreeing, some even pitying my brother for having to deal with me. My chest tightened as the screen blurred through my tears. I felt 12 years old again, erased, humiliated. But then, amidst the cruelty, a single anonymous comment appeared on my blog. "You're not useless. You're just at the beginning of your story." I stared at those words for a long time. Something shifted inside me. I wasn't sure I believed them, but I wanted to. I needed to. One of those faceless readers would eventually change my life, though I didn't know it then. A few months later, I attended a free workshop about real estate. I almost didn't go. I was tired, broke, and convinced I didn't belong, but I forced myself through the doors of that conference hall, where I met her. Her name was Lauren Hayes, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a voice that carried authority. She spoke about investment strategies with a confidence that filled the room. Something about her presence drew me in. After the session, I timidly asked her a question. To my shock, she smiled and said, "Evelyn, I've been reading your words for years." My stomach dropped. She was the anonymous reader who had left encouraging comments on my blog. For the first time, the screen had a face. Lauren became my mentor. She taught me to see the patterns others overlooked, to trust the instincts I had been suppressing all my life. She said I had an uncanny ability to read markets, to sense when an opportunity was about to bloom. At first, I didn't believe her, but the more we worked together, the more I realized she was right. My intuition, the same gut feeling I had used to survive in a hostile household, now became a compass for investment. I began to test myself. Quietly, cautiously, I entered the real estate world. At night, I live-streamed under a pseudonym, The Velvet Broker. I shared small tips, answered questions, and built a community. Nobody knew it was me. Behind the anonymity, I could finally speak without fear. To my astonishment, followers grew. People respected my knowledge. They listened. Each week, my confidence grew stronger. Each month, my savings grew higher. I studied obsessively, built connections, and took calculated risks. And one evening, as I signed the final papers, I became the proud owner of a $450,000 condo. I didn't tell a soul. Not Lauren, not my friends, and certainly not my family. That condo was more than property. It was proof. Proof that I wasn't the failure they thought. Proof that the invisible daughter had carved out something real, something untouchable. I walked into the condo the first night, turned on the lights, and stood in the empty space. The polished floors reflected my shadow, but this time, the shadow belonged to someone who mattered. I ran my hands along the cool walls and whispered, "This is mine." It felt like the beginning of a new chapter, one no one could rewrite. But I didn't realize then that the condo, my most treasured secret, would become the spark that set fire to everything I had built. The first time I walked into the small office of the investment group, I felt like an imposter. They were a collection of sharp-minded professionals, all speaking in numbers, projections, and strategies that seemed beyond me at first. But as the weeks passed, I began to realize that I could keep up. More than that, I could see angles others didn't. The instinct that Lauren had always told me about proved real. Soon, people weren't just tolerating my presence. They were seeking it out. For the first time, I wasn't the shadow in the corner. I was part of something. Through the group, I met people who weren't tied to my past. They didn't see me as the useless daughter. They saw value in my ideas, respected my contributions, and trusted my instincts. That trust was intoxicating. It was what I had craved my entire life. One evening, after a particularly successful pitch, one of the senior investors clapped me on the back and said, "You've got an eye for this, Evelyn. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The words lodged deep inside me, healing wounds I didn't even realize were still open. It wasn't long before an opportunity came that would change everything. A CEO, known for being notoriously hard to impress, had been quietly observing our group. After one meeting, he pulled me aside. "I like how you think," he said, "but I don't want you as just another face in the room. I want you as a private advisor, off the books, anonymous." I hesitated. Me? Anonymous advisor to someone of his stature? It felt surreal, but the offer was real and I accepted. For the first time, I had influence that extended beyond small deals. My strategies began shaping major decisions, guiding projects worth millions, though no one knew my name. It was a strange paradox. The girl erased by her family now held power behind closed doors. One afternoon, I sat alone in a quiet cafe, scrolling through spreadsheets on my laptop. A thought crossed my mind, and before I could stop myself, I laughed aloud. The sound startled me. I couldn't remember the last time I had laughed like that. Maybe, I thought, sipping my coffee, I finally belong somewhere. But belonging was never simple for me. At home, the script was being written without my knowledge. While I was finding my place in the world, my family was preparing a very different role for me to play. My reach continued to expand. Through connections with Lauren and the investment group, I was introduced to a young startup working on integrating AI into real estate analysis. They needed investors, and I saw the potential immediately. I invested quietly, becoming a hidden shareholder. Months later, when the startup began making headlines, I knew I had made the right decision. The Velvet Broker, the media called the mysterious figure whose guidance was reshaping the market. No one knew who I was, and I intended to keep it that way. Anonymity was my shield, my protection. I had built a fortress around my name, one that my family couldn't touch. The world praised the Velvet Broker, while Evelyn Carter remained the same daughter mocked at home, and mocked I was. My parents had no idea about my success. To them, I was still Spinster Carter, the failure who had never married, never achieved anything of value. They took to live streams, making jokes about me, using me as the punchline for their followers. My brother laughed along, basking in the glow of their approval. I would watch the clips sometimes, just to remind myself of who they believed I was. It stung, yes, but it also fueled me. Every insult was fuel for the empire I was building in silence. Every sneer was another brick in the wall between who they thought I was and who I had become. Still, their voices had a way of burrowing into me. I could silence them in boardrooms, drown them out with the thrill of a successful deal, but in the quiet moments, alone in bed, staring at the ceiling, the words crept back in. Spinster. Failure. Ungrateful. Yet I reminded myself that while they tore me down in their tiny corner of the internet, the world beyond was rising to its feet because of me. The irony was almost poetic. The same parents who branded me worthless were unknowingly living in a world shaped by my decisions. But their mockery was not harmless. They weren't satisfied with jokes and sneers. They wanted more. While the world was applauding the Velvet Broker, my family was plotting. They wanted to use me one last time, not as a partner, not as a daughter, but as entertainment. And soon, they would have their stage. Returning to America felt like stepping into the past, but this time I wasn't the same invisible daughter who had left. The board of directors had summoned me to the official announcement of the company's new ownership. My presence was necessary, though my identity remained hidden from most. As the plane touched down, I gazed out the window, the skyline of my home country, stretching out like a memory both bitter and sharp. Every heartbeat reminded me of what was coming. The Hamiltons were desperate. News of their financial ruin had spread quickly, but my parents and Ethan clung to the belief that salvation was near. They boasted to friends and business partners that a global investment firm was stepping in, that the family legacy would be preserved. They had no idea that I was the architect behind the deal. To them, I was still the daughter who had failed and fled. That illusion would shatter soon enough. The night before the announcement, they hosted a party at the Hamilton estate, a final show of strength. The chandeliers sparkled above rows of polished glasses, the room filled with chatter and music. I entered quietly, a guest among many, but Susan spotted me almost immediately. Her smirk widened as she crossed the room with a glass of champagne in hand. "Claire," she said sweetly, but her eyes glinted with cruelty. "At least you should thank us. We freed you from that house, remember? You never belonged there anyway. We turned it into something useful." Her words were laced with triumph, as if she had done me a favor by erasing my ties to home. I met her gaze without flinching, took a sip from my own glass, and let the silence stretch. Then, slowly, I turned toward Ethan, who stood surrounded by admirers. My voice was calm, but my words cut sharp. "Are you sure you'll still have a seat after tomorrow?" His smile faltered just slightly, but he covered it with a laugh. No one else noticed, but he did, and that was enough. The next morning, the conference hall was packed with investors, journalists, and employees, their eyes fixed on the stage where the future of the Hamilton Company would be decided. The air crackled with tension. My parents sat in the front row, Ethan beside them, his posture stiff with pride. They still believed they were untouchable, still certain the new ownership would protect their place. When I walked into the hall, whispers rippled. Some recognized me, most didn't. My parents glanced my way and exchanged smug looks, as if my presence only confirmed their superiority. Ethan leaned over to one of the directors and muttered something that made him chuckle. I sat quietly, watching, waiting. The proceedings began with formal speeches about stability, restructuring, and the promise of renewal. My parents nodded along, their faces painted with relief. Then came the moment of introductions. One by one, prominent figures from the investment consortium were named, each rising to polite applause. My parents leaned forward, eager, convinced their salvation was moments away. But then, Susan's lips curled into another sneer as she spotted me across the room. She stood, her voice slicing through the quiet. "Look at her," she said loudly enough for others to hear. "Always hanging around where she doesn't belong. She's here to bask in our success. Isn't that right, Claire? Don't you wish you had been smarter, like your brother?" Laughter followed, scattered but sharp. My father added, "She's always been envious. Don't mind her, everyone. This is family business." The humiliation was deliberate, cruel, meant to strip me bare in front of strangers. I remained silent, hands folded on my lap, my face calm though my chest tightened. Across the room, however, I noticed the investors exchanging knowing glances, their eyes flicking toward me with quiet recognition. They knew the truth. My parents did not. That imbalance, that fragile edge of knowledge made my silence stronger than any retort. The air grew heavier, the audience shifting in unease. Journalists scribbled notes, cameras clicked, and tension built like a storm about to break. Every second stretched, and I could almost hear my mother's smug breath as she relished the attention. Then the master of ceremonies stepped forward, his voice firm. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for, the introduction of the company's new chief executive officer. The lights dimmed slightly, a single spotlight swinging across the stage. My heart thudded once, steady and strong. My parents sat taller, certain Ethan's name would be called, certain their reign would continue. The spotlight stopped. It wasn't on Ethan. It wasn't on my parents. It was on me. My name rang out, clear and undeniable. Claire Hamilton. The ballroom had descended into chaos. Shouts overlapped, phones kept streaming, and I stood at the center bleeding, trembling but unbroken. Then, cutting through the noise, a voice boomed, not from the stage, but from the live stream itself. Enough. The screens around the room flickered, and suddenly a familiar face appeared on the massive projector that had been streaming comments. It was Marcus Hale, the CEO I had advised in secret for years. His face was stern, his tone commanding. "She isn't ungrateful," he said, his voice amplified for millions to hear. "She is my partner. The reason my empire doubled in 3 years. Without Evelyn Carter, half of you wouldn't even have the homes you live in now." The ballroom froze. The air shifted instantly from ridicule to stunned silence. My parents' eyes widened, their mouths parting as if the ground had just been ripped from beneath them. Gasps filled the room, and on the live stream, comments exploded. "Evelyn Carter. The Velvet Broker? Are you serious? This changes everything." The words I had hidden behind for years were now public property. No more pseudonyms, no more shadows. The Velvet Broker had a face, and it was mine. For a moment, time seemed to stop as recognition spread across the crowd. People who had sneered at me minutes before now stared as if seeing me for the first time. But the revelation was only the beginning. I stepped forward, taking the microphone from my stunned father's hand. My voice shook at first, but grew steadier with each word. "You called me ungrateful. You told the world I was worthless. But everything you have paraded as success, your home, your parties, your reputation, was built on my back. And tonight, I'm done letting you lie about who I am." The crowd buzzed, half in disbelief, half in awe. On the live stream, hashtags shifted. Zener ungrateful. Daughter was drowned out by the Velvet Broker. The tide was turning. But there was more. I took a slow breath, blood still dripping down my arm, and delivered the blow I had kept hidden for months. "The house you live in, it isn't yours. It's mine. And as of this week, it's sold." The gasp that erupted was louder than the music had ever been. My mother clutched her pearls, my father's face drained of color. Daniel stumbled backward as whispers spread like wildfire. On the live stream, comments screamed in real time. "She sold their house." Parents. From hell. Trending in 3, 2, 1. The audience turned, eyes darting between my parents and me, hungry for every twist. My father stammered, You can't, you wouldn't." "Oh, I would," I interrupted. And I did. The internet caught fire. Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram lit up with clips of my declaration. No parents. From hell shot to the #1 spot globally. Strangers who had once mocked me now raged against my parents, dissecting every cruel word, every live stream where they had belittled me. The world had seen their violence, and now they saw their downfall. But the biggest twist was still to come. I leaned into the microphone, my voice low but cutting. "You called me ungrateful. But the truth is, you've been ungrateful all along. You borrowed against my name. You forged documents. You took loans in my credit and left me with the debt. You never told anyone that the only reason you kept this lifestyle was because I saved you from bankruptcy." The crowd gasped again, but this time in disgust, not at me, but at them. The guests who had once laughed with my parents now turned their backs. Phones rose higher, capturing every horrified expression on my parents' faces. My mother shook her head violently. "She's lying." But Marcus Hale's voice cut in again through the live stream, steady and irrefutable. "She isn't. I've seen the records myself. They stole from her, and when she saved them, they turned her into a joke. Tonight, the truth belongs to her." The room erupted, not with laughter, but with outrage. Guests whispered harshly, some even leaving, unwilling to be associated with my family. Online, the comments turned venomous against my parents. Monsters, abusers, cancel them. My parents stood pale and trembling, their empire of lies crumbling before the eyes of millions. For decades, they had held the power to erase me. But now, the erasure was theirs. They were the villains of their own story, and there would be no escaping the judgment of the crowd, nor the relentless permanence of the internet. And as I lowered the microphone, I realized this wasn't my collapse. It was theirs. The cancellation was no longer a fear hovering over my head. It was their reality, and it had only just begun. The ballroom that had once echoed with laughter now trembled with silence. The crowd parted as my parents' faces, ashen, turned to me. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in their eyes. My father's voice cracked, raw and desperate. "Evelyn, please, we didn't mean to—" My mother clutched my arm, her hands trembling. "We only wanted to protect Daniel. We thought if we gave him everything, he would succeed. That's all we ever wanted." I pulled back, their touch burning like acid. My voice was quiet but cut through the air sharper than any scream. "You didn't protect him. You destroyed me." They flinched, as if the truth itself was a blade. My brother stood off to the side, his expression torn between guilt and disbelief, but I didn't care anymore. For years they had excused their cruelty as love, their betrayal as sacrifice. Tonight they wanted to rewrite history again, to wash away decades of scars with a single plea. But there are wounds that apologies cannot mend. "I don't want your excuses," I said firmly. "You called me ungrateful, a failure, a burden. You tried to erase me. And now that the world finally sees the truth, you want me to pretend it never happened. No, I am not your daughter anymore. Not in the way you want me to be." The words hung heavy, echoing in the silence. My mother's tears streaked her mascara. My father's shoulders sagged. They looked small, fragile, nothing like the towering figures who had haunted my childhood. But pity was no longer mine to give. I set my boundary clearly for the world to hear. "We share blood. That is all. Beyond that, we have nothing." Gasps rippled through the audience, but my heart felt strangely calm. It wasn't revenge that filled me. It was release. For the first time, I had carved a line they could never cross again. And yet, as I stepped back, a thought whispered, "Can I truly leave it all behind?" The question lingered, like smoke that refused to clear. I turned without another word and walked toward the exit. Cameras followed, live streams capturing every step. The spotlight that had once humiliated me now lit my path forward. The same millions who had witnessed my parents' cruelty now bore witness to my choice to walk away. Outside, the night air was cool against my skin, the city lights shimmering like distant stars. With each step, memories surged. Me at 10 years old, my name erased from a certificate. Me at 16, forced to abandon my education. Me on a sofa, invisible in my own home. And then, the woman I was now, strong enough to buy, to build, to own, to leave. As I reached the car waiting for me, I glanced back once. Through the tall glass windows of the ballroom, I could see my parents crumbling beneath the weight of their own lies. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't need it. What I felt was peace. I smiled faintly, not with pride, not with malice, but with the quiet relief of a survivor who no longer needed to fight. The next morning, I sat in my new office, papers spread across the sleek mahogany desk. The deal before me was worth millions, the kind of contract I once could only dream of. My signature would seal not just a business transaction, but the future I had carved out of ashes. As I lifted the pen, my phone buzzed. A new message appeared, the words simple but heavy with possibility. "We need you for something bigger." I stared at the screen, the city skyline glowing outside my window. For a moment, I let myself breathe, the weight of the past lifting as the horizon opened wide. Because this wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning of something greater.